Okay, so I'm gonna play some Bach. Oh, I have it right here.
No, I mean, but like, oh, how am I gonna be prompted?
He's gonna, yeah, that's his sermon. Okay, so. Just give it a moment. Let's give it a minute. Here's a B flat. Yeah, you're seeing. That's a B flat. Wait, not yet, not yet. Okay. Yeah.
It's you alone. It's you yourself. It's you. It's you.
Good morning. Welcome to those with us here in this space and those joining us on Livestream. I am Laura Shinham, Minister of Congregational Life, and I will be joined on the chancel this morning by Rochelle Fautier-Wadabia, who is our board moderator. Our speaker this morning is our former minister, John Buehrens, and the worship associate is Dennis Adams. Thanks to our musicians today and our tech team, including those who are monitoring chat and are available to help if you have any questions. We hope all of you here or on Livestream have an order of service so you can follow along in worship. Thank you for wearing your mask indoors at coffee hour following the service. If you are outdoors in our Thomas Starr King room, you can remove your mask while drinking and eating. We do ask everyone to remain masked in our hallways, what we call our gallery, so that those spaces are safe spaces for our vulnerable folks. Everyone speaking or singing today who removed their mask had a negative antigen test this morning. Thank you for your cooperation in keeping everyone safe. Now that I have gone over some of the formalities of welcoming you into our service this morning, I would like to turn to acknowledge a harm that happened in our sanctuary last Sunday. The Lunar New Year began last Sunday, January 22nd. This is a time of celebration for our congregants. It has a long tradition of history and a deep meaning to many of those of Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, and Taiwanese descent. Those who recognize the Chinese New Year honor this year as the Year of the Rabbit. Those who recognize the Vietnamese New Year honor this year as the Year of the Cat. The Lunar New Year is observed by over 1 billion people, not only in Asia, but in the majority of countries throughout the world with Asian diasporas, such as the US. Lunar New Year is even a San Francisco public school holiday. As I mentioned, last Sunday was the beginning of the Lunar New Year, and it was mentioned it was the Year of the Rabbit at the beginning of the service. An unfortunate comment was made that, while intended to be funny, had the impact of being dismissive of a sacred holiday many cultures hold dear. Added to that harm was the laughing heard throughout the congregation. This was extremely harmful and disrespectful to our congregants celebrating the Lunar New Year. We are all harmed when we witness cultural erasure. In talking with congregants harmed, I understand this was an example of how easily their traditions and culture have been dismissed and erased in our society. In addition, during a time of celebration, the community was dealing with the deep sadness of the mass shootings at the Lunar New Year activities in Monterey Park, and then compounded by another shooting on Monday in Half Moon Bay. In the US, there has been and continues to be an anti-Asian violence and harassment. Members in our congregation have felt the impact of the violence and the trauma associated with it. As one of the ministers in this congregation, I offer my deep apology to those congregants who were impacted by this harm. I apologize for the dismissive nature of the comment and for the added impact to hear the laughter of those present. I apologize for adding more harm to a tradition that was already impacted by violence. I am deeply, deeply sorry. As a leader of the congregation, I vow to do better in ensuring our guest speakers understand the beautiful diversity of our congregation and to take care with their words. I vow to provide continuing education to help us as a congregation know how to name harm in the moment, even in worship. This is work we signed up to do as a community when we affirmed the 8th principle. My hope is we see this as a learning and growth opportunity to lean into this work, to lean into the discomfort, and to better recognize when our fellow congregants are harmed. I encourage each of you to find a way to engage in this work. If you need help finding a starting point, then feel free to set up a time with me or our senior minister, Vanessa Rush Southern, to talk further. I encourage you to learn more about the Lunar New Year celebration. Our service next Sunday will have elements that will focus on this centuries-old tradition. There are activities throughout the city honoring the New Year, and one is the Lunar New Year Parade on Saturday, February 4th. There is information in your order of service or in the flame about how you can participate. In addition, many of the businesses in Chinatown are still recovering from the pandemic and could use your support. So stop by, get a meal, snack, or a gift. I will now invite our board moderator, Rochelle Fortier-Wadabia, to offer words as an elected lay leader of our congregation.
Thank you, Reverend Laura. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rochelle Fortier-Wadabia, and many of you know I presently serve as the moderator of our Board of Trustees. And I'm here today with a very heavy heart. And as moderator, my message today is that it's really up to us. And so I'll begin my comments with why we are here. And the answer is simply that since this is the place where the harmful words were spoken, it must be the place where repair begins. Appearance on the chancel will not happen with every harm that's inflicted in our community, but because it took place here and the response from our congregation was laughter, it is important that we respond from this place. So my message again is that it is up to us. Everyone should know that the board has been extremely mindful of the work of the 8th principle. This resolution of the Board of Trustees, which should be in your order of service, was passed at the first board meeting after the passage of the 8th principle. I encourage everyone to take the time to read this at your convenience. Feel free to carry it with you. In the resolution, you will see references there to beloved community. And many people ask, what does it mean to strive for beloved community? And how do we do it? I'm here to let you know that the Board of Trustees has begun the work. This past fall, we each participated in Beloved Conversations. And for those of you that are not familiar with Beloved Conversations, I'm going to read a quote from their website. Beloved Conversations is a program for people seeking to embody racial justice as a spiritual practice. The program is grounded in Unitarian Universalism, developed and offered by the FOS Collaborative of the Meadville Lombard Theological School, and it's open to all learners. In Beloved Conversations, we are here to heal the impact of racism on our lives in order to get free together. Also this spring, the board will participate in a small group pilot project with the Star King School for the Ministry. It is a 10-week program which has been funded by our Hinckley Fund called WEAVE, W-E-A-V. It's based on Star King School of the Ministry's Educating to Counter Oppression. It's a Star King educational method that will consist of this 10-week program and center the voices of those bearing the impact of systemic injustice, build spiritual community, increase trauma, exposure, awareness, and self-care practices while weaving in restorative and reconciliation practices, since data shows that harm is still being done in our UU communities. And this curriculum was developed by Star King, especially for congregations. I believe that our funding and participation in this pilot project reflects our commitment that we are making to this work. We have also encouraged community chairs to be more mindful and to engage as lay leaders. In addition, I would like to announce something that we've been working on for over a year, which is a right relations team. We have several members of our congregation that have been attending training that's been offered by the UUA this past fall, and it will be completed in February. At that time, the board will be able to establish a team that can serve the community and support our journey towards beloved community. And I want to offer a special thank you to all of those that are in the training and their dedication to the health of our community. Again, it is up to us. It is up to us to recognize when harm is present. It is up to us to recognize that cultural erasure is not appropriate in any context. In this situation, it happened in the blink of an eye. And adding insult to injury, it was at a time when Asian culture should be intentionally centered, honored, and respected. Yet, we laughed. It is up to us to make sure that cultural erasure no longer has a home in this space. So let's take a minute here and remember who and what we say we are in our mission and vision statements. That we are a vibrant, joyous, caring, inclusive community of diverse people. We create a nurturing space for spiritual growth and learning, which is based on our shared values. We will work together courageously and publicly for human rights, economic justice, and environmental salvation. And our vision for our community is that we, as First Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco, we delight in our authentic, inclusive congregation that reaches across generations, ethnicities, and differences. And we take care of one another, building spiritual community, knowing that we are stronger and accomplish more together. Guided by our responsibility to future generations, we're taking leadership and shaping a compassionate and sustainable world, inspired by our courageous heritage and compelled by our conscience. We hold one another accountable to work for racial, environmental, and economic justice, and above all, dignity and rights for all. I think we fell short this past week, and I'm sorry to say that it is not the first time. So to avoid these behaviors that create harm, we must engage in this work of the eighth principle. It's a journey full of spiritual practices, unlearning, and learning anew. We begin by working on our own internalized racism, and yes, I'm speaking to myself, so that we can truly begin the healing that this community richly deserves. So if you haven't already, I encourage you to watch our videos on UUSF Media that challenge us to recognize the microaggressions that live rent-free in what we would characterize as the two white zone. Enroll in Beloved Conversations, which is now open for the spring semester, and engage in the opportunities in our community to increase our understanding of our own limitations, increase our multicultural awareness and capacity to respect and honor all cultures in the moment. I look forward to seeing you on this journey of unlearning and learning anew. I'm striving myself to bring my better self in all spaces, and especially in this one. And I hope that we all develop personal and spiritual practices that contribute to healing and the erasure of harm. Again, it is up to us.
Thank you, Rochelle. I did reach out to Rabbi Singer, and these are his words for you. I am sorry if I offended anyone. I wish nothing but blessing for those celebrating the Chinese New Year. Please extend my apologies. It was not meant to denigrate that beautiful moment for so many. I know it is a time of great pain when there now should be joy. May there be healing and peace. Shalom, Rabbi Singer. Now I'd like to invite us into a moment of silence for all those affected by the mass shootings in Monterey Park and Half Moon Bay. I invite us into a second moment of silence for Tyree Nichols and his family, as well as all of those affected by police brutality. Thank you so much for being on this journey together.
And now, so we can all draw even a little closer together, we will have our unison chalice lighting with the words that are provided in your order of service. If you're joining us at home, you can light your own chalice if you'd like. We light this chalice for the light of truth, warmth of love, and the fire of commitment. We light this symbol of our faith as we gather together. And now, if you will rise, if you're willing and able, we'll sing hymn number 308, The Blessings of the Earth and Sky.
Blessings of the earth and sky upon our friendly house do lie. The rightness of a master's art has blessed with grace its every part. The warmth of many hands is strewn in human blessing on this stone. The wind upon the lakes and hills performs its native rituals. The worship of our human toil brings sacrament from sun and soul. With words and music we the earth in nature's wonder seek our worth. Here earth of promise and of love.
Now we have some really brief invitations, if I can read this. We'd like you all to sign a petition after church today at the gallery in honor of Dr. Howard Thurman. We want to honor him with a street sign in San Francisco at the social justice table. On behalf of the committee to install a commemorative street sign to honor the legacy of Dr. Howard Thurman, 1899 to 1981, we, the undersigned, respectfully request the city of San Francisco to erect a commemorative street marker honoring one of the city's most distinguished residents, the late Dr. Howard Thurman. I'll let you read the rest at your leisure in your bulletin, and we'll go on with the program. I can find my place. With greeting one another. I'm sure you've been waiting to do that. And now we'll do our covenant and doxology as printed in your order of service. We'll say our covenant together. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another.
Dwell below the skies, let songs of hope and faith arise. Let peace, goodwill on earth be sung through
I invite you now to join me in a few moments of reflection, meditation, and prayer. Spirit of life, God of many names, mystery reverenced in many cultures, mystery beyond all our naming. We come before you this morning acknowledging the smallness of our souls. Too often, self does not reflect upon self and grow the soul. Too often, the person before us is treated as other, a mere object of our convenience in that moment of interaction. We confess our obtuseness to the sacred in others and what they reverence. Our souls are battered by pandemic and by violence in the world. We withdraw within ourselves, and we come here knowing we need connection with our fellow finite, fragile human beings who help us to draw ourselves out of ourselves in a lifelong process of growing a real soul, more fully alive, more fully attentive to the world about us, its wonders, its blessings, its diversity. May we use this time of reflection to prepare for deeper connection. May we expand the circumference of our souls throughout our lives until we live as truly we know we want to live and are the aid and comfort of soul growing in the lives of others. For this has been the mission of this sacred place throughout its long history. Help us this morning to know that our calling is tied up with the wide circumference of this community and its calling to make the world kinder, more caring, more just and inclusive. These things and more here in shared silence. We would pray. And then, as it is in the meditations of our hearts, when we are truly at one with ourselves, our better selves, with one another, and with the common source of our soul growing, so may it be also in our daily words and deeds. The hymn is number 391. Voice still and small.
Voice still and small, deep inside all, singing in storm and rain, sorrow and pain, still we remain singing, calming my fears, quenching my tears through all the years, singing.
We are now about to embark on a historical romp through the history of this congregation and this great city. From its very beginning, members of this congregation were conscious of human greed, obtuseness, and racism. The first piece of music we will hear was the most popular among those who came here in the gold rush of 1849. Subsequent popular songbooks suppressed many of the worst lyrics. That tune, written by Kentuckian Stephen Foster in 1847, when sung by men coming here to California in the gold rush, perhaps the majority of them white Southerners, were sadly explicitly racist. They came along with ex-criminals from Australia and elsewhere. The San Francisco they came to by 1850 was both booming and violent and dangerous. There were among them, however, merchant-class Yankees, including Unitarians. But the only New England-style church in town at first was Calvinist. That is, it required that members state why they felt they were among the precious saints whom God had predestined to save. And then on a September morning, a Unitarian from Eastport, Maine, Joseph Coolidge, the co-owner of a rather ramshackle hotel, ran into his one-time pastor, Reverend Charles Farley. Farley'd come here like most of the other men, feeling like a failure. Churches he had served had not flourished. "You must preach for us," Coolidge demanded. "I can't," Farley replied. "I brought no sermons with me. There's no library. And what would we do for music? Where would we meet?" Well, Coolidge said that some of the most prosperous merchants in the city were Yankee Unitarians, and one of them was a Mr. Simmons who owned a hall, the Athenaeum. And he himself had a fiddle and a Unitarian hymnal. Reluctantly, Farley agreed. He would preach. A male quartet was formed. It included one James Pierpont, a Yankee Unitarian from Boston, later best known for composing a little tune called Jingle Bells. A male quartet because there were, as near as I can tell, at that first service, absolutely no women present. And let's just say the very few in the city were not churchgoers. At Thanksgiving, Farley gave a rousing sermon of aspiration, I would say, called The Moral Aspect of California. And the newly chosen Unitarian trustees, in their civic mindedness, had it printed and widely distributed. But after only 6 months, Farley went back east to his wife and son. He didn't even consider bringing them to this city. Fires too often struck a town made of tents and wooden buildings. There were arsonist gangs that thrived on extortion. And they were only gradually being countered by men like Captain William McCondry, the city's most reliable merchant banker and this church's first moderator. He organized a fire brigade, made sure that his own business was soon in a fireproof brick building. And when they wrote to Boston for a new pastor, promising, quote, the largest and most wealthy congregation in the city, they also promised to build a fireproof church. The first minister to answer the call, one Joseph Harrington, had great gifts, but like many others, he arrived through Panama, where he contracted yellow fever. He preached 3 times before dying. The trustees voted to give his widow his full pay for a whole year, plus a generous bit more. And then, remarkably, went on with building that building. It was down on Stockton Street, above its later tunnel. And although Puritan plain, it seated 1,000 people. That's how many folks were often at services, even in 1851. But after a financial bust, only half the pews were occupied, and there was debt accumulating. By 1856, one trustee, James King of William, the editor of a newspaper, published an account that indicated that another editor of a rival paper, who had been elected to the city council, was essentially a George Santos-style fraud. He'd come straight here from Sing Sing. He had bribed the sheriff to stuff the ballot box to get him elected, and it was all true. But the accused met King on the street and shot him. And as he lay dying, outraged citizens, including McCondry, formed a vigilance committee of 8,000. They deposed the sheriff and the entire council. They hung a few miscreants who were obvious and ran off others, and then made one of their own, Ephraim Burr, mayor. And he combined city and county government. That was the first time Unitarians in this city led the cleaning out of City Hall. It didn't last. White settlers were viciously purging California of its indigenous population. And in 1857, the U.S. Supreme Court notoriously ruled in the case of Dred Scott that no people of color could be full citizens of the United States or have standing in its courts. Here in San Francisco, 800 African Americans, nominally in a free state, decided to leave. They fled to Victoria, British Columbia. And Mary Ellen Pleasant, a black woman who stayed and who had prospered owning laundries and boarding houses, posing as a servant to a white banker when he was actually her business partner, she took a trip to Ontario to deliver funds to white abolitionist John Brown for his Harper's Ferry effort to launch a slave insurrection. Most of the rest of Brown's backers, the Secret Six, were Boston Unitarians. While she was away, here in the city out on Ocean Beach, the recent Chief Justice of California, David Terry, challenged U.S. Senator David Broderick, a fellow Democrat, to a duel and shot him and killed him for not being sufficiently pro-slavery. It was into this context, in April of 1860, that the man memorialized there, young Thomas Starr King, age 35, the self-educated son of a shoemaker turned Universalist minister, having successfully served a Unitarian church in Boston, stepped off the steamer from Panama with his wife and child. It was Washington's birthday, 1862. Abraham Lincoln had very narrowly won California's 4 electoral votes in 1860 by a plurality of only 700. Starr King was one of the key motivators, now the West's most effective anti-slavery pro-union orator. While down at Calvary Presbyterian, their minister, a native of New Orleans, was preaching that white supremacy was divinely predestined. And even during the war, publicly prayed for both presidents, Jeff Davis as well as Abe Lincoln. Starr King then rewrote a lecture on the very idea of the United States, doing it at the home of Jesse Fremont on Black Rock overlooking Alcatraz. He then delivered it to some 2,000 people in the city's largest hall, each attendee paying $1, the equivalent of about $50 today, to be present. And when the crowd applauded wildly at the end, his young parishioner, the writer Bret Harte, leapt from the Fremont box, waving the stars and stripes, and the two began chanting to the tune we have just heard, "We are coming, Father Abraham, 300,000 more." The crowd demanded that Starr King repeat this lecture on behalf of preserving the Union and resisting the peculiar institution that had provoked the secession. And he did so all over the state, much of it on behalf of a new organization led by Unitarians called the Sanitary Commission, the predecessor of the Red Cross, motivated by the fact that more soldiers were dying of disease than in battle. Starr King was by far the star fundraiser. He absolutely astonished the leaders of the commission by wiring drafts of $100,000 at a time. In effect, the gold coming from California in support of the Union also was keeping afloat the credit of the federal government and blocking British bankers from helping the South, the source of their cheap cotton for its textile mills. Starr King not only saved California for the Union by raising more money for humanitarian relief than anyone previous in American history, he also did other things that are too often forgotten. Along with Jesse, he launched the West's first circle of naturalists, intellectuals, artists, and writers. Bret Harte was just one of them. There was also Charles Warren Stoddard, probably California's first openly gay poet. Starr King put him in touch with Walt Whitman. And there was Ina Coolbrith, a refugee from Mormonism, hiding the fact that she was the abused niece of Prophet Joseph Smith. When she became the state's poet laureate, she encouraged other writers, from Joaquin Miller down to Jack London. Before coming out here, Starr King had written a book about the White Hills of New Hampshire, their legends, landscapes, and poetry, that simply embodied the transcendentalist teaching that if you want to see God, look at the sublime in nature and feel your smallness. See the disempowered as your sisters and brothers. No sooner had he returned from the mountain than he addressed all of the city's black population on August the 1st, which they celebrated as Emancipation Day, remembering that it was the anniversary of the British abolition of slavery in the Caribbean. And then he got Carlton Watkins, a pioneer landscape photographer of the West, to go where he'd been, Yosemite, to take pictures of its wonders on mammoth plates. He delivered sermons from the pulpit called Yosemites of the Soul, living waters from Lake Tahoe, and filled the 1,000 seats on Stockton Street to overflowing so that the trustees felt they needed a bigger church. They built one on Union Square, which he named, that seated 1,600. They gave the old church to a black congregation. Starr King worried that the new building, with its fashionable Gothic architecture, was too showy. He often lectured on show and substance. But sadly, he preached in it only 7 times. He had exhausted himself in his ministry and his efforts, contracted diphtheria on top of the tuberculosis he'd long had, and died at the age of 39, saying, "Keep my memory green." That lovely tune, again by Stephen Foster, became popular just as Starr King lay dying. His successor, Horatio Stebbins, inherited Starr King's dream of broader, deeper public education and a role on the board of what was then called the College of California, a male-only, struggling liberal arts college in Oakland that had been given some land on the hillside a bit further north. Governor Frederick Lowe, the second successive member of this congregation to serve as the state's governor, went to his minister, Stebbins, saying that the legislature wanted an agricultural and mechanical university. And Horatio Stebbins, although rarely recognized as such, became the effective founder of the University of California by offering up the land in what then became known as Berkeley and the college's charter on the condition that it always teach the humanities and the liberal arts. He was a regent for 3 decades. The end of the Civil War hardly ended violence in this area. Chinese immigrants brought in to build the Transcontinental Railroad. Once that job was completed, became the object of hatred by the white working class, who demanded their exclusion. But Stebbins, at a banquet welcoming a trade delegation from Japan, publicly ridiculed the gubernatorial leaders of both parties as giving in to both ignorance and racism, while he lauded East Asian civilization as representing a spirituality older than Christianity. And Unitarian Congressman Horace Davis spoke out in Washington for, yes, there might be a need to limit Asian immigration, because too often the people who imported the workers were exploiting them, and he blushed to even speak of why they brought in women from China. He himself taught the adult Bible class in the church for 50 years, sort of a la Jimmy Carter. And when two Japanese American young men joined that class, he sponsored them to train for the Unitarian ministry. But that is a complex story that has to do with the changes toward militarization in Japan. Gender and social equity were still sorely lacking. I could tell a couple of rather salacious stories about all-male juries literally letting someone get away with murder. One of them involved Stebbins' son-in-law, but I'll forbear. He couldn't retire until he was nearly 80 for lack of a pension. But by the time he did in 1900, the young adults in the congregation, rather bohemian in style, calling themselves les jeunes, had formed a circle that published a humor magazine called The Lark, which included, from the pen of Gillette Burgess, a member of the church, that immortal ditty, "I never saw a purple cow and never hope to see one, but I can tell you anyhow I'd rather see than be one." Later he wrote in the final issue of The Lark, "Oh yes, I wrote the whole purple cow. I have to say I did so, but I can tell you anyhow, I'll kill you if you quote it." By 1900, both local political parties were so corrupt that a Union Labor Party had arisen. Unfortunately, it was, if anything, worse. Its lawyer went around extorting the businesses of the city, saying that in return for their bribes, he would prevent strikes or wage demands. And he, in turn, paid off the Board of Supervisors and the mayor, and himself said that they were so greedy they'd eat the paint off a building. In 1906, when the earthquake and fire struck, the Union Labor people were in charge. And the new minister of this church, heading the city's interfaith relief efforts, soon saw that the corruption at City Hall was so deep that it needed to be cleaned out again. He organized the clergy of the city to persist in getting the mayor indicted, even though at his first trial, someone shot the prosecutor in the head. Business leaders did not want this system that worked so well for them exposed. But at the second trial, when convicted, the entire Board of Supervisors decided to resign. Some of you may recall that when I began preaching from this pulpit in 2014, David Chu, who was then the president of the Board of Supervisors, came and told this story to us and said, "Why am I here? Because you Unitarians are scary." To which I replied, "I hope so." Some of our spiritual and moral influence, however, has never been all that dramatic. Liberal religion didn't exactly prosper during World War I or the Roaring '20s, the Great Depression, or World War II. British-born Reverend Sam Dutton, an early supporter of the NAACP, was the minister then. But one of his quiet congregants was a woman named Ida Shookman Brown, who had married an Irish Catholic and promised that their children would be raised as Catholics. But when she found that her husband was engaged in some rather shady enterprises, she looked for a church of her own and joined here and taught in the Sunday school, sometimes asking her children, "Are you quite sure that what your catechism says is what Jesus himself had in mind?" Becoming the moral center of a family that produced two more progressive governors, her son Pat Brown and her grandson Jerry. The book I've written about our history includes a photo of Pat Brown's first inauguration with Jerry, then in his seminarian collar, looking past his dad, right at his grandma Ida. When World War II caused the unjust removal of the Japanese population from nearby Japantown, this sanctuary saw the inaugural service for the first church in America explicitly organized on a non-denominational basis to face down racism. The Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples, organized by Howard Thurman, a black minister and later mentor of Dr. King and a white colleague, was hosted right here. But by the time Sam Dutton retired, Unitarian membership was down to 125 in 1949. The average attendance in the sanctuary was about 30. The church, however, like this city, has proven resilient through both booms and busts, ups and downs steeper than the hills. And in 1967, thanks to the post-war baby boom, this was the fastest growing urban Unitarian church in the country, with over 1,000 members and more than 350 children and youth in the church school. Lucy and Edith Aline, having grown up in the church, granddaughters of Mayor Ephraim Burr, then left the congregation the enormous sum of $1,800,000, the equivalent of 25 million or so today, while the Redevelopment Authority was pressuring the church to both purchase the rest of this new triangular block that was created by redirecting Geary Boulevard and building on it as soon as possible. Despite the reservations of 3 of the 9 trustees and both of the ministers, Harry Schofield and Howard Mattson, the congregation voted to go ahead and build the center that we now enjoy, not for itself alone, but for the whole city. The work began in 1967. Okay, go ahead. If you come to San Francisco?
Yeah, later. It's later in the program.
Okay. Have them play If You Come to San Francisco. Be sure to wear some flowers in your hair. That summer of love, Harry Schofield later recalled, had people all over the country phoning him saying, "Can you find my son, my daughter?" As idealism hit midlife relationships, the demands on him for pastoral support and counsel just soared. And the construction of our beloved center took 2 entire years. Structural problems were found with the church itself. Services had to be held in a synagogue, the church school at a YMCA. The offices had to be rented. Costs were twice what had been expected. And by the end of the process, membership was down to the 600s. Schofield felt exhausted, and after his wife Sarah died, he chose to retire early. His successor, David Rankin, was an eloquent preacher, but found paying off the mortgage that the church had had to acquire and raising in a family suffering from, again, violence. David Talbot has dubbed that era after the Summer of Love the season of the witch. It was just too much. It went on through the zebra murders and at one point, with people still writing, had an uncle who was a Unitarian once, and I'd like to come to San Francisco. Can you help me find a cheap place to live and a job? Rankin stood in this pulpit and preached a sermon entitled, "Shall I Swim to Honolulu?" Instead, after 5 years, he left for a booming church in Atlanta where the schools were better. This just after the Jonestown Massacre and the assassinations of Milk and Moscone. His young assistant, Diane Miller, became the acting senior minister, hiring Mark Bellatini, an openly gay seminary graduate, to assist her. Some of you I now probably remember all this. Together, they faced events like the White Nights, when the gay community rioted, outraged over the light sentence given Milk's assassin. Not to mention disruptions from characters like the one who called himself Jesus Christ Satan. The successful partnership between Bellatini and Miller, however brief, was followed by several decades of ministerial partnerships. A few failed, one rather painfully, but the partnership of Margot Campbell Gross, now our Minister Emerita, and the late John Newcomb Marsh not only stabilized things for nearly a decade, but produced other partnerships to contribute to the public good. The late Kay Jorgensen partnered with Sister Carmen Bersotti to found the Faithful Fools Straight Ministry, and as Minister for Social Justice helped launch an after-school and summer program for children in the Tenderloin and Western Addition. Margot's sabbatical in South Africa led to a long-running partnership with the Women of Kopenhagen, and we partnered with Unitarian churches emerging from the communist era in Eastern Europe. I don't have to tell you that the beginning of the present century again brought further economic disruptions to the city. The collapse of the dot-com speculative boom, the huge increase in technology, the lack of affordable housing, much more. But perhaps I've said enough about recent history, except this. Reviewing the entire history of the congregation, I became terribly proud of how, for the last decade, we have weathered even a global pandemic, called new and gifted ministers, developed strong programs of human rights advocacy, lay chaplaincy, and have never forgotten that this, our spiritual home, does not exist for itself alone. It is truly a religious center with a wide civic circumference. The book that I have spent the last 5 years laboring on is now published, available on Kindle already, paperbacks being shipped. 2 weeks from now, I hope to sign a few for some of you. I hope you'll join me in reviewing and celebrating the courageous yet unfinished work of this congregation and its members in making this city, and indeed the world, a safer, more civic-minded, and more just place to live. Amen.
Powerful response. like to rest my heavy head tonight on a bed of California stars. I'd like to lay my weary bones tonight on a bed of California stars. I'd like to feel your hand to touch it in mine and tell me why I must keep working on. Yes, I'd give my life to lay my head tonight on a bed of California stars. Yes, I'd give my life to lay my head tonight on a bed of California stars.
Hello. If I could just tell you that today's offering is going to Coastside Hope. They're an organization that is helping with the victims and families of those who were harmed and affected by the shooting in Half Moon Bay. Here is their website in your order of service, and to make a donation on Vanco, also in your order of service, or using the donate button below and on our website, please select the offering choice to make your gift. If you're sending a check, please mark in the memo today's date and special offering 12923. And if I could just add the words of Thomas Starr King, what he said about money. All our money has a moral stamp. It is coined over again in an inward mint. The uses we put it to, the spirit in which we spend it, give it a character which is plainly perceptible to the eye of God.
Are you going to San Francisco?
If you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear some flowers in your hair. If you're going to San Francisco, you're gonna meet some gentle people there. For those who come to San Francisco, summertime will be our loving there. In the streets of San Francisco, gentle people with flowers in their hair. All across the nation, it's a strange vibration, people in motion. There's a whole generation with a new explanation, people in motion, people in motion. For those who come to San Francisco, summertime will be our loving there. If you come to San Francisco, summertime will be our loving there. If you come to San Francisco, summertime will be our loving there.
My labor on the research and writing of a comprehensive history of this congregation is my gift to this church and to its future. But I would be remiss without acknowledging how many helped. Jonathan Silk, our amazing communications director. Lucy Smith, who just lit a candle and was one of the early editors. I could go on and on. The acknowledgments in the book are extensive. Our final hymn is one of my favorites, though rarely sung. What gift can we bring? What present? What token? It's number 404 in the hymnal. I invite you, if you are willing and able, to rise and join me in it.
What gift can we bring? What present, what token, what words can convey it, the joy of this day? When grateful we come, remembering, rejoicing, what song can we offer in honor and praise? Give thanks for the past, for those who had vision, who planted and watered so dreams could come true. Give thanks for the now, for study, for worship, for mission that bids us turn prayer into deed. This gift we now bring, this present, this token, these words can convey it, the joy of this day. When grateful we come, remembering, rejoicing, what song we now offer in honor and praise.
And now in our going, may all that is holy, may all that is loving bless us and keep us, extend its reach from each and every one of us beyond these walls. Grant us peace, knowing that we have been blessed, and help us to lead lives of blessing in the world that awaits us, our witness and our care. Go in peace.
It only takes a tiny corner of this great big world to make a place you love. My home upon the hill, I find I love you still. I've been away, but now I'm back to tell you. San Francisco, open your golden gate. You let no stranger wait outside your door. San Francisco, here is your wandering one, saying I'll wander no more. Other places only make me love you best. Tell me you're the heart of all the golden West. San Francisco, welcome me home again. I'm coming home to go roaming no more. San Francisco, open your golden gate. You let no stranger wait outside your door. San Francisco, here is your wandering one, saying I'll wander no more. Other places only make me love you best. Tell me you're the heart of all the golden West. San Francisco, welcome me home again. I'm coming home to go roaming no more.